In the scorching Arizona sun, Captain Jamila Ward, a 33-year-old African-American woman, pulls over on a secluded highway after a long drive. At first glance, it seems like a routine police stop, but something is wrong. The sheriff turns out to be not only corrupt, but willing to go to extremes to humiliate and destroy her. The fight for life, dignity, and justice begins. A single call to the Pentagon is enough to change everything. But can she stand up to a system that can't see her? Time is running out and the enemies are closing in. The real fight for the truth has just begun, and she's ready to go all the way. Jamila Ward, a captain in the U.S. Army, gulped down a sip of water, feeling the sun beating down through the window of her black Jeep, penetrating her skin, burning to the bone. Arizona. The desert. The silence. The words of the conference about cybersecurity and logistics for the military were still in her mind when, as usual, a sharp glint in her rearview mirror caught her attention. She immediately noticed the red glow of police beacons. All of her instincts of anxiety kicked in at once. It's just a traffic stop, she thought. But her heart was already beating faster. Jamila calmly slowed down, pulled over, and put her hands on the steering wheel to demonstrate that she had no intention of doing anything sudden. She felt her fingers grip it tighter, ready for any eventuality. The sheriff drove closer in his dirty pickup truck, which looked like it had been in service for 20 years. A tall man in sunglasses and a dirty uniform with a faded badge got out of the car. His movements were sluggish, as if he was used to being in charge of everyone on these roads. This was a small, despised police force in the hinterlands of a state where anyone who didn't look like a typical resident was suspect. Jamila had been through such detentions many times before. Her black skin has repeatedly become more of a marker for others than any documents or titles. She has endured many, not once, not twice. These stops that always questioned her, made her ask why she was not welcomed with open arms, but only looked at cautiously. The sheriff came to her window and stomped his heels on the dust. His gaze slid over her dark skin, then quickly settled on her military uniform, the shackles of her shoulder straps, and then back to her face. License and registration, he grunted. Jamila nodded discreetly and slowly opened the glove compartment where all her documents were. She took out her license, driver's license, and registration for her Jeep, placing them in front of him on the passenger seat. She took her time, didn't try to look overly calm, just made it clear that she had no intention of doing anything to scare him. With her experience in the Army, she knew perfectly well that in such situations it was important to keep your cool. What's this? He grabbed her military ID card. So you're a captain too. So, what are you doing here, militarist? His words were filled with mockery. Jamila held her breath to keep herself from getting flustered, but she realized that the situation was getting more and more tense. Her presence as an African-American woman with an officer's rank in this place was a challenge to him. She responded calmly. I'm coming back from a conference in Tucson. I'm on the road, just trying to be careful about the rules of the road. The sheriff paused for a moment, as if considering her words, then straightened up arrogantly. You certainly weren't in a hurry when you were driving faster than you should have been, he finally said, laughing. And what kind of militarist is that in a car like that? What are you hiding here, huh? Jamila felt a chill run down her spine. She had seen this approach more than once. First, minor humiliation, and then an investigation as proof that she was out of place. She answered, trying to be calm, but coldly, so as not to show any weakness. No, Sheriff. I have nothing illegal, just my luggage and a few work documents. The sheriff laughed as he turned back to his pickup truck and muttered something into his radio, as if trying to find any reason to escalate. Jamila sighed and looked at his car, realizing that this stop was more than just a paperwork check. Suddenly, the sheriff turned around, holding a plastic gossip bag, and Jamila realized that he wasn't just looking for trivia. His intention was deeper. And then she felt it, the first real rush of danger. But she also knew what she had to do. Jamila remained calm, trying to keep her composure even as her heart beat faster and her chest pressure rose. She was a U.S. Army officer. She had every right to be here. But that didn't matter to the sheriff, who clearly viewed her as an outsider, a dangerous stranger who could be humiliated for his own pleasure. The sheriff approached her window, and Jamila immediately noticed a change in his behavior. His gaze became even more attentive and even aggressive. He wasn't just checking her papers. He was looking for a reason to make her guilty. Did you hear me? His voice was rough, with a raised tone. Get out of the car, now. Jamila felt her legs grow heavy, but immediately turned her body toward the door. She had no intention of being manipulated, even when this man was trying to force her to do what he wanted. "Why'd I have to get out of the car?" she asked, her voice clear, but her eyes tense. "I have all the papers and I follow all the rules." Without answering, the sheriff opened the door and pulled her out of the car by the arm. She was momentarily confused by this violent gesture, but quickly adapted, standing firmly on her feet. Jamila did not allow herself to show weakness, even when his hands gripped her wrist with brute force. "You're not in your rightful place right now, Captain." He smiled mockingly as he pressed down on her back, forcing her to walk with him across the dried earth of the roadside. Her steps were heavy, but each one reminded her that she belonged here, that she had a right to be on this highway, even if this man didn't understand or want to understand. They were getting closer to his car when Jamila felt her heart beat even faster. Beyond the horizon, she could see several cars moving toward them. Something was wrong, and her instincts told her that things could get out of hand. The sheriff came up behind her, checking her pockets. Jamila was not naive. She knew that he had no right to be so aggressive without reason, but she had already learned to keep her temper in check in times of danger. "Come on, woman, show me what you have in your bag." His voice was sharp and dismissive. Jamila looked down at her bag and calmly answered, "I will not allow you to search my belongings without justification, Sheriff." He looked her up and down and lowered his voice. "Do you know who I am? I'm the sheriff of this county. You are a stranger here. And as long as you think everything is okay, we're going to deal with you." The blood in Jamila's veins sent a cold wave, and this time she couldn't hide her fear. She felt her cell phone pocket throbbing, but she had only one wish, not to give him a reason to escalate. "Well, hold on," she said quietly, almost to herself. Her training in the army was beginning to pay off. She knew that acting on emotion was the worst decision, but now it was very important to stay calm. The sheriff, having not gotten the desired result, began to nervously check his radio. His behavior became even more intolerant. After a few seconds, he took a step back and asked, "Did you just think everything would be so calm? Look at yourself. You're in uniform, and all you're doing is making fun of me." Jamila stood there looking him in the eye, her mind already taking in all the scenarios. Something unpleasant was brewing, and she knew she had to act before things got out of hand. The pressure was building. Her thoughts were focused on calling the Pentagon, although for now it seemed like a dream, not a reality. The sheriff pressed his radio, and Jamila realized that he would have to come up with another way to intimidate her, and she had to be ready for it. A light breath escaped her heart again. She knew that the fight was just beginning, and that her every move had to be deliberate. She was not going to give up. Jamila felt her internal tension reach a peak. It was not the first time she had been in this situation. As an officer in the army, she had faced misunderstandings because of her skin color, but she had never let it stop her from acting. However, this was different. The sheriff wasn't just stopping her. He was willing to do anything to bring her to her knees. His mood was changing, and Jamila could feel it in every cell of her body. The sheriff went back to his car, as if trying to find new arguments to escalate the situation. Jamila stood still, her hands clasped together, but she did not lower her head. She couldn't afford to, even though every muscle in her body was screaming with tension. Her mind was clear. She had to stay one step ahead. After a few minutes of silence, the sheriff got out of the car with a serious expression on his face. He picked up his radio and said something in a hurry, then headed back to Jamila. His steps became heavier, more confident. She immediately realized that he was serious. "Do you want another check, Captain?" he asked, slowly approaching. "Or would you rather get out of the car and follow the right path?" Jamila held her breath. She could feel her nerves starting to fray, but she knew that now was the time to act. If she gave him any chance to escalate, he would use it as an excuse for even more violence. Her mind reacted quickly, and she decided not to give him the satisfaction of her weakness. "You are violating my rights, Sheriff," she said calmly but firmly. "You have no grounds for further action." The sheriff shrugged his shoulders. "Rights? Do you still think you have rights here?" His voice was cold, and his eyes flickered with hostility. "And people like you should know their place." At that moment, Jamila felt her adrenaline rush. Her heart beat faster, but she didn't let herself get scared. She knew that his words had no power, and that the only chance to avoid escalation was to remain calm. Suddenly, she heard the low rumble of an engine, and her heart stopped. Another car was approaching them from the side, but it wasn't a police car. It was black, with tinted windows and quickly stopped nearby. Several people got out of it. They were dressed in black suits and looked like private security guards. The sheriff bowed his head and his expression changed. Jamila noticed that his gaze had become anxious, but he was still impressively confident. They stood for a moment looking at each other, and then one of the men in the suit stepped forward, addressing the sheriff. "Things aren't going as we planned." His voice was calm, but there was something menacing about it. "This woman is not for your hands, understand?" The sheriff frowned a little, as if trying to figure out whether to continue this game. He turned back to Jamila, and his eyes were no longer so aggressive, but he wasn't ready to leave her alone. "You asked too many questions." His words became vague, not as convincing as before. Jamila decided it was time to act. She pressed the button on her cell phone that would connect her to the Pentagon. She did not know that her call would be answered right now, but she was ready for anything. Immediately, a voice came over the line, Lieutenant Campbell from the Pentagon. "Jamila? Are you okay?" he asked, sounding slightly calm but with an expression of concern. "I got pulled over by the sheriff in Arizona," Jamila said quietly, trying not to let the nervousness in her voice show. "I think they're trying to make it personal. I need help. We're on the line. Stay on the line." "It's not going to end like this," Campbell replied, his voice filled with a confidence that gave Jamila strength. The sheriff looked at her again, seeing her face fill with new determination. "Do you have connections, Captain?" He tried to threaten again. But this time, Jamila was no longer afraid. "I have the right to be protected, and I will not stay here any longer." Her words sounded firm and decisive. The sheriff realized that the situation was already slipping out of his control, but at that moment he began to realize that Jamila was not someone to be intimidated. She was a woman who had her own way and was not afraid to stand her ground. And although the situation was becoming increasingly tense, Jamila knew one thing: it was not over. The battle for justice. Jamila stood there, her back tense and every muscle in her body ready for what was to come. Sheriff Dallas, clearly not getting the result he had hoped for, began to look at her angrily, still with undisguised contempt in his eyes. He remained in front of her, throwing questions and threats into the air, which were getting heavier by the second. The feeling of danger did not leave her. Jamila knew that with each passing moment, the chances of escalation were increasing. Her eyes continuously scanned her surroundings, looking for a way to escape, and she found strength in the fact that her mind remained calm, even though her heart was beating wildly. But what could she do? Her cell phone was still in her pocket, and although she had already called for help, nothing had changed in a few minutes. "Come on, woman, tell me who you really are," he said, smiling as if he held all the cards. His voice changed, became angry and insolent. "Maybe you really want us to search your car here? You certainly didn't just come from some meeting." He emphasized every word, his irritation obvious. Jamila felt her heart skip a beat. She stood there, trying to hold herself together, because she knew that if she gave in to the provocation, things could end very badly. He continued to push her to the brink, getting too close to her. "Well, Captain, what are you really doing here?" His language was sharp, clipped, and he was filled with anger that seemed to grow with every word. But Jamila could not allow herself to break down. Her face remained unwavering. She could see his hands on the radio and felt that this was not just a test. He was interested in something more. He wanted to make this his personal triumph. "You can only search me with probable cause, Sheriff," she replied calmly, keeping her composure, "and I don't owe you any explanation without cause." He laughed mockingly. "And what are you going to do about it?" His eyes radiated evil. He leaned toward her and commented insolently, "Do you think I don't know who you really are?" Those words were like clinging, cold ice that penetrated her chest. Jamila felt that this was not just a check of her documents. It was more than just a matter of control. This was an attempt to show her where she belonged, against a backdrop of systemic injustice, and she desperately resented it. Meanwhile, the sheriff turned to his radio and said something. Jamila looked at him, watching his every move. And then there was a desperate flash from her cell phone, reminding her that the call to the Pentagon had been made after all. A little more time, and she could have escaped from this dead end. But at that very moment, another car approached the horizon, coming so close that the sound of its engine was felt in every cell of her body. The first to get out of the car were two men in black suits, dressed as private security guards. Their eyes were focused on Jamila, and it was immediately clear that this was no accident. The sheriff, who stopped and looked at the newcomers in confusion, clearly realized that it would be difficult to keep the situation under control. "What do you want?" he asked, turning to the men. One of the guards named Carl spoke, his voice calm and cold. We are working under orders from Judith Morgan. Don't ask questions, Sheriff. Just let her go. And that was too much. Jamila realized that something big had happened, and now she could only hope that she would be able to escape from this trap. Meanwhile, the sheriff, noticing that the situation was quickly spiraling out of control, could not hide his irritation. He was not prepared for his little game with the authorities to become public. Are you protecting her? He could not contain his anger. But Carl and his colleague just nodded and approached Jamila step by step, as if they were ready to help. They surrounded her, and in a moment, when the sheriff was left speechless, Jamila was safe. Her heart was still beating fast, but now she was relieved. The call to the Pentagon had worked. She could breathe, even if she was on the edge, knowing that the system had finally started working for her. Later, when the car left the state, Jamila sat down and took a breath, looking into the distance. It was only an initial victory, but this night showed her that she was not alone. When the car finally left the small town, Jamila felt the tension begin to ease, though her heart was still pounding in her chest. She was sitting in the back seat of a black SUV, traveling across a deserted Arizona road. Carl, one of the bodyguards, sat in the front seat, silently watching her through the rearview mirror. He was firm and calm, silent in his determination. His colleague in the passenger seat didn't say a word either. Jamila breathed in the air, which, though hot and dry, seemed to be less heavy now. She had known for a long time that her life would not always be easy. The military path for an African-American woman in the United States promised only struggle, and it was not always a struggle on the battlefield. It was a constant battle for the right to be heard, to be respected, to get what she was due. Now, as her rescuers silently carried her across this empty land, Jamila began to realize that not all battles can be won instantly, but every battle, even the one that seems like defeat, changes the system if you just stand up. Thank you, she said quietly, breaking the silence in the car. Carl nodded without turning his head. He knew it wasn't just gratitude. It was her hope that it was still possible to change what seemed unchangeable. This is not over, Captain, he said, his voice serious, emotionless. You have played your part, but it is only the beginning. Jamila nodded. She was ready. She could not take back what had happened, but she already knew that her fight would not end there. A few hours later, the car was stopped at a large, guarded gate on the outskirts of Phoenix. There, Jamila got out of the car and saw a new reality. At first glance, everything looked safe, but a sense of suspicion remained. She saw high walls with barbed wire, huge guards at the gate, and people frozen in their postures who did not look pleasant. We have to go inside, Carl said, getting out of the car. This place is safe, but you'll have to wait. Wait. Jamila was surprised. What is this place? What's going on? This is no place for cowards, Captain. Carl finally smiled, though his eyes remained serious. Jamila felt her heart beat harder again, but her mind was determined. She could not give up. She couldn't let anyone control her life, even if it meant being trapped in some mysterious, safe environment. She knew that the more she allowed herself to stay safe and relax, the more likely it was that her story would remain unchanged. She walked inside and immediately noticed several people passing her quickly, their gazes cold and impenetrable. They all looked as if they knew that nothing was as it seemed at first glance. But Jamila had no choice. She was going forward, and it was her only option. After several hours of waiting, Carl finally came back and approached her. I have news, he said. It's all part of a bigger plan. What you went through was just a small part of what's going on in the state. They didn't break you, but now the system is reacting. You have to be ready for it. Jamila clenched her fists. Everything she had been through, everything she had been taught in the military, everything she knew about fighting was just the beginning. She was ready. She had gone through physical violence, through systemic restrictions, through corruption and racism. But she was alive. She was strong, ready to fight. And she knew that now it was her turn for revenge. This was a fight for justice, and she was not going to back down. Carl handed her a piece of paper with several names and addresses written on it. Here are your allies, he said. You are not alone in this fight. Your role is more important now than ever. Jamila looked at these names and a new look appeared in her eyes. She realized that her fight was not over. This was her army, her front. Thank you, she said, clenching her fist again. Although she was not alone, Her heart grew heavy with the realization that her every move would now decide the fate of not only her, but many others. Her fight had just begun, but she was ready. Jamila was sitting in the shade of an old tree on the territory of the secret complex where she had been brought after being rescued. It desperately seemed that peace and safety were closer than ever, but she knew it was not over. Her eyes never left the sheet of paper in her hands, which contained names, addresses, and phone numbers, all the things that could lead to those behind this injustice. She remained on the edge, between two worlds, the world of people who wanted to restore justice and the world of those who were trying to destroy it. And although she was not alone now, she felt that the battle had just begun. Erase what she knew. This conspiracy was huge. All those power structures that were entangled in corruption, all those people who used her as a pawn, were actually creating a vast system that intercepted power, money, and resources. They were part of the reason why Jamila, despite her rank, despite her service in the army, could not be heard. But she was ready for it. More than ready. In her hands, she held another document that Carl had sent her. It was secret information about the activities of the Morgan family, the judge, and the sheriff who were behind her arrest. It seemed that they were all doing everything in the open, covering for each other. Once again, it was all part of one big corruption trap that was hard to confuse with the truth. But she couldn't stop. Jamila promised herself that she would not stop until she revealed the whole truth. And it was not just a fight for herself. She was a symbol for many. For those who were forced to remain silent. For those who were destroyed by a system that tried to silence them. Her victory was to be a victory for all those who were unjustly oppressed. A few hours later, she met with some of her new allies. These were people who had also faced the same corruption and injustice in other parts of the state. Jamila pulled out a sheet of paper and began to tell her story, explaining every step of her fight against the system, every moment when she had to stand on the edge and then summon all her will to stand up for her rights again and again. One of her allies, a middle-aged black man with gray sideburns, listened intently. His name was Alvin. He realized at once that what she was going through was only part of the systemic struggle that Jamila was part of. He told me about how there was also a lot of hidden abuse in his area that was covered up by everyone else, from the local police to the local government. They're always looking for ways to control us, Alvin said, looking into Jamila's eyes. You are not alone. And you are not alone in your quest to find out the truth. I know, Jamila replied, and I will not stop. We have to act together. If we keep up this front, they won't be able to stop us. Jamila remembered her struggle when she was in the hands of the sheriff and his brothers, and how she felt every moment was her last. Now she realized that she had to act quickly because time was not on her side. Her former enemies, who had now become her greatest allies, were ready to go with her to the end. They devised a plan, and soon Jamila was sitting in front of her computer screen, reviewing all the information flows coming from the highest levels of government. She was looking through records, audio recordings, and messages that confirmed all the corruption that had been hushed up for years. A system that covered up and protected people like the sheriff and the judge from any punishment. At one point, when Jamila finally gained access to some of the most sensitive records, it became clear to her that her real fight was just beginning. She knew she had to stop this before her enemies tried to start the machine of injustice again. What had once seemed like an ordinary roadside check had become her fulcrum, her starting point in the struggle not only for her own freedom but also for change in the entire system. She could not turn back. Her heart was not fluttering with fear, but with determination. This was her mission, her path, and now she was ready to expose the dirt. Jamila's story was not yet complete, and she would not allow it to be finished.